Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, September 12th, 2018. How is my mute button doing? I don't know. It worries me from time to time. But there's nothing more entertaining on this end than pressing the button. It's just a very weird feeling. You press the button, you hear the introduction. Now, here's David Waldman. You press the button and you say, you hear in your own headphones, and then you press the button again and say, into your own, ready. God damn, what the hell's going on here? All right, so the third button press is the one that finally turns it on. And here we are, September 12th. We're in a September 12th mindset, as usual, on September 12th. That's what comes after September 11th. Yesterday, an utter disaster for America as we watched the president mug his way through 9/11 remembrances, fist pumping and everything. Everyone really enjoyed that. I got a good laugh out of looking at the photos, of course, but it's a sad thing that he can't hold it together and be an appropriate national leader even for one day. But I don't think anybody really expected him to be able to pull that one off. Anyway, on to 9/12, the first day after 9/11 on which we can recognize things like, things like the hurricanes, actually, a combination of hurricanes in Puerto Rico last year appear to have killed about as many people as the 9/11 attacks, but they were a huge success. Apparently, part of the day given over by Donald Trump to bragging about the huge success of how he handled the storms in Puerto Rico, which is an amazing development. Of course, no one in the world views it as a success except for him, and I guess he's probably got some sycophants around him who tell him it's a huge success. But further news today as first copies of the official release of Bob Woodward's book begin arriving in the hands of, I guess, the eager few who ordered or pre-ordered the book so that it would arrive on their desks today. Journalists, I guess, got their advance copies yesterday and or over the weekend and have been tweeting excerpts ever since. Let's see. This morning, I understand, I see from Twitter that the discussion on Morning Joe, I never really get around to watching that, but Armando sometimes does. Maybe he can tell us about it. But we are told via Twitter that the discussion with Bob Woodward was about his Trump's pattern of falling into denial and tantrums when he is confronted with the truth. Dun dun dun. The singular truth. It is out there, and of course, objective facts do appear to bother him tremendously. Let's see. I think I may have retweeted that thing this morning, so it might even actually be simple and easy to find, but then again, maybe not. Might be able to grab it and bring it up. I think it was Raw Story that I happened to see passing that news around. I'll see if I can come up with it relatively quickly. But I think in this instance, Bob Woodward was giving the example of, as he said, something esoteric and discussing Trump's view of the World Trade Organization. Yes, here it is. Raw Story tweeting this around about 2 hours ago. Woodward reveals to MSNBC's Morning Joe how Trump throws tantrums when confronted with the truth. So one small slice of the truth. And now I just realized, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm opening a Raw Story page right in the middle of the show. This could end everything. Travis Geddes, hopefully we'll get away with this one without crashing our computer, covers this for Raw Story. Bob Woodward explained to MSNBC's Morning Joe that President Donald Trump is fundamentally incapable of facing reality. You'd think that would be sort of an issue for a president, but maybe not. I don't know. Pardon me. Okay. take a little break to sneeze here. A couple of allergens in the air today. Let's see. So what are they talking about? The journalist and author, and we're talking here about Bob Woodward. Time for me to get rid of a pop-up. Not now, pop-up. It's really not the time. Okay. The journalist and author said much of the best reporting on Trump's presidency has been focused on the Russia investigation. But Woodward said he has uncovered a troubling pattern in all of the president's failures. And that seems unlikely, only because there are so many. I don't know how you could absolutely guarantee that you had covered all of his failures and finding the same pattern in all of them. He's innovative and inventive when it comes to new ways to fail. So you never know. Anyway, in the foreign policy areas, he explains to us, the handling of North Korea, Afghanistan, the Middle East, all of the immigration issues, all of the trade issues, I was able to excavate and find out what actually happened. Maybe. That's what Woodward claims. Nobody claims this about all his books. This is the pattern. He won't face what's real. And this does feel like he may have nailed it on this one. Woodward has written books on 9 presidents, from Richard Nixon to Trump, and he said each one is different, but he said the current president has a defining characteristic. I think the key in examining Trump is actually what will he do when people present him with facts, he said. Now, normally you think a president, when presented with facts, says, interesting, I need to formulate policy based on those facts. Not this president. So Woodward continues. He says, for instance, it sounds a little esoteric, but the World Trade Organization, which the United States is a member of, very important, allows us to file complaints of unfair trade practices. And there's a meeting in the Oval Office, and the president says, well, the World Trade Organization is the worst organization ever. We lose all of our cases. Trump's advisors presented him with data that showed the U.S., in fact, won 85.7% of the cases brought before the organization. He simply rejected their data. He says, no, that's not true. And the people are saying, look, call the U.S. Trade Representative, your guy, and he will confirm this, Woodward said. Woodward said the president simply refused. I don't want to hear it, Trump said. According to Woodward, I don't want to call him. I don't want to deal with it. The president flat out rejects information that challenges his biases and beliefs, the reporter said. At some point, he gets literally where the aides ask him, where did you get these ideas? Woodward said. And he will say, well, I've had them for 30 years. They're right. And if you disagree, you're wrong. Well, that's one of the problems with having an insane narcissist, and one that's not particularly smart, in addition. As President of the United States, I think you've probably come to grips with the fact that that's what we're dealing with. But in case you were wondering what it would be like to govern from this place, well, if you haven't figured it out in the last year or so, I assume you never will. That's, I guess, just what you're going to have to deal with. He's just going to sit there and insist that he's right, despite all the evidence, and everybody who thinks he isn't right is actually wrong. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know when people are going to say no to him, and when people are going to say no, and you're just not capable of doing this job, period, and perhaps put an end to it. I have no idea. I was just reviewing yesterday, because it was 9/11, people were tweeting around the various offensive things that the president had done with respect to 9/11, and there were plenty. But the one that caught my eye yesterday was, let's see. Maybe it's even in my feed somewhere else, but tweeting around the various television appearances that Trump had done either on the day, which were extraordinarily offensive because he spent that time spreading false rumors about people being rescued alive from the rubble, and of course, years afterwards, spreading the false stories of, I saw with my own eyes on television, which he also didn't see. Pictures of people celebrating, dancing in Jersey City as the towers came down, celebrating the attack. And, well, that was not so. And I saw recirculated yesterday. We'll dig it up for you, hopefully, if I can only remember to do so. Someone unearthing the interview, pardon me, that George Stephanopoulos conducts with him. And it's one of the most frustrating things you've ever seen, of course. And there are many, but this particular exchange in which Stephanopoulos thinks he's got him, I'm sure he goes into the interview thinking, I've got Trump dead to rights. Trump has very famously been spreading the story of the celebrations in Jersey City, trying to pin it on the Arab populations, the Middle Eastern populations in Jersey City, that they were celebrating, the attack on the World Trade Center. And I mean, I could just imagine Stephanopoulos going into this saying, I'm going to bring it up, and he's either going to deny it or whatever, or, maybe he'll change it or he'll apologize for it, or maybe we can force him to do that. And no, I mean, it was just one of them. It's like a crystalline example of what you're dealing with when you're dealing with Trump. He brings it up and says, you've said that you saw people celebrating, or I don't even know if he brings it up, but Trump brings it up. And Stephanopoulos says, well, as you know, the police, the reporters, journalists have asked the police about this, and the police say that just didn't happen. And Trump just goes on to say, well, that's wrong. It did happen. I saw it myself. It was widely covered at the time, George. It was covered everywhere. It was all over the news. Everybody saw it. And I don't know, perhaps it's not, and then he goes into his little thing about it. Maybe it's not politically correct to say it, and all of you politically correct people don't want it to be true, but it is true. I saw it and it was widely covered, and you're wrong, George. And Stephanopoulos is stuck with saying, well, again, the police say it didn't happen. Not it didn't happen, but the police say it didn't happen. Well, that's just not so. And he refuses to budge, and Stephanopoulos breaks and says, well, I want to move on. And I'm sure he had other questions to ask him, but it was just, I saw it again, and it was just this big heavy sigh, like, oh, I want to move on. You want to move on? I don't care what you want to do. Stop. Hold on a second. No, go back and say, listen, I was trying to break it to you gently. The police said it didn't happen. It didn't happen. You're full of it. You're absolutely full of it. You're full of crap. And you shouldn't say things like that. And it's disturbing that you're at that point. I don't know whether he was nominated for I don't know. I don't know what stage it was in. I don't know when they did this interview. Who cares? It doesn't matter. You're an adult in America. You got bad information. I'm not going to allow you to pass it on. And I'm not going to allow you to say, it did happen. I saw it with my own eyes. You didn't see anything. You were hiding in your apartment. You didn't do anything. One of the other clips circulating is Trump insinuating that he helped clear the rubble after the attack. And you could see how that one occurred. I mean, he's giving a speech, and he's trying to praise the first responders, which is like normal reaction, that sort of thing you normally would do as a politician, and saying, but then he realized how it's coming out as he says, I watched as these brave first responders were, removing the rubble and rushing to face danger. I watched, because he watched on telly. He watched the whole thing on television, which, look, everybody did. Who was going to go out and just, unless you were right there, A, you had no chance to go out and observe it firsthand, and B, you were foolish if you did, because they really didn't need you milling around down there, and you were putting yourself in danger, of course. No thanks to Rudy Giuliani and moderate Republican / never Trumper Christy Todd Whitman, who told everybody the air's fine. Everybody who breathes it has had problems ever since, but you should have stayed in your apartment. And Trump, I'm sure, did stay in his apartment, or he may have evacuated to somewhere else. I'm sure that at some point when he realized that tall, beautiful buildings are under attack, they're coming for Trump Tower next, and, maybe. So he might have taken off from one of his golf resorts, figuring that those would never be attacked. And they wouldn't be at that time. Now they would be, but okay. And I'm sure he watched on television, as we all did. But he realized as he's giving the speech, I think what happens is he realizes how kind of cowardly that sounds for a guy who's, the biggest fan of his legend is, of course, himself. And he realizes, I'm not in this story. I'm not brave and helping clear the rubble. And so he throws that in there. I watched as the brave first responders were clearing the rubble. And I helped a little bit. He can't really quite bring himself to say, I helped. I got myself all dusty. Everyone knows there's lots of pictures of me in my fancy suit and my crazy hair is full of dust and I'm just so brave. No one saw that. No. I don't think he's worried about being caught out as a liar, but he tempers it a little. I helped a little bit. I moved a rock. What he did was, and I don't even think he fled to his golf courses. What he did, as I learned yesterday, I think for the first time in watching video clips, he hung around Manhattan giving interviews to television stations, particularly this one I saw, a foreign television station, German television, telling them, how brave the police and firemen were, which is great, but then passing on false rumors, which I guess everybody was dealing in that day, of 5 firefighters having been rescued from the rubble, which they hadn't been. Nobody was rescued from that rubble. And, but like I said, at that time, that could be forgiven. Lots of people didn't know what was going on and were repeating stories that they didn't know whether or not they were true. And at least that would have been a good story had it been true. I don't blame them for that. But the idea of I watched them clear the rubble. In fact, I didn't just watch. I did it myself. I did all the clearing of the rubble. I saved 1 million people. Just, the same, and more of the habitual lying about things. So it was a little bit just disturbing to watch. So maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't. And of course, off to Shanksville, some people noting that he tweeted out in the morning about his departure for the Pennsylvania Memorial and tweeting a picture of which again he insinuated was from yesterday, some sort of departure ceremony, I guess, in which he had assembled all sorts of official looking people on the lawn of the White House to see him off. It was in fact the picture of a remembrance ceremony from last year, but at least it was a 9/11 picture. But I don't know whether he would probably say, I didn't tell anybody. I never said this was a picture from today. I just said I'm setting off today and gave this picture, and people just assumed that I thought that was a picture from today. And maybe he did, because he is demented. We do know that much. Anyway, just a all around disturbing day. But, enough of that. I think we've covered it all. Greg Dworkin not with us this Wednesday or this Thursday to help us round up stories. And so we'll have to do it ourselves. And that can be very difficult, but I have a few that I happen to have at the ready. And, it's a kind of a weird mix, this bunch. I saw this one yesterday and I thought, oh no, this will be so disastrous and we will have to report it. But before I even got a chance to read it to you, it had been I guess we'll call it debunked. But this was an odd story, that I didn't think would come around to any kind of debunking given the source, not the source where I read it, but the source where I read it got the original story. Cause I read it in Axios and that could easily be wrong. That doesn't surprise me. This story here, should we pin it on an author or what? Let's say no on this one, because I don't know. It seems like, this one might have been a difficult one to get right yesterday after hearing the report that they heard. And you kind of got to be a bit of a budget wonk to figure out apparently why this doesn't come out exactly as reported. The headline is a head turner. U.S. on course for $1 trillion deficit. Okay. That sounds bad. What sounded worse was the way it was reported here in Axios. The U.S. deficit grew by $222 billion from this time last year, reaching a total of $895 billion, according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office. That's the Congressional Budget Office, in case you weren't listening closely enough. Boy, I'm really having Well, maybe I need some kind of new allergy pill here between the sneezing and the frogs in the throat today. It's not even particularly troublesome. I haven't noticed it up until right now. But anyway, the CBO reporting those numbers, well, that should be relatively reliable, right? And then, of course, Axios, you know how they report things, why it matters. We hope that was sorted out and obvious in the headline, but I guess if not, this increase was due mostly to the new Republican tax law and Congress's routine decision to increase spending, which grew by 7%, compared to revenue growth of only 1%. The CBO said the deficit will approach $1 trillion by the end of fiscal year 2019. Okay. Well, that makes, I believe they've revised this then. Yes, there we go. Let's see. Let's see. And here's an editor's note. This post was corrected to reflect that the CBO did not change their estimate of when the U.S. would approach $1 trillion deficit. We had incorrectly stated they changed their current estimate from one in April. So I see that is already different, because what I had put away was they had said that, and I think now I have to look again at my own Twitter feed to see if did they maybe delete their thing here? But, this tweet is unavailable. Okay. So they deleted their original tweet. It says, the original headline in Axios was that the CBO was projecting a $1 trillion deficit at the end of this fiscal year. And that sort of struck me, and I retweeted it because the question was, wait a minute, the end of this fiscal year? You mean like the one that ends in 3 weeks from now? Remember, the fiscal year ends at the end of September. It's that September 30th to turn over to October 1st is when the fiscal year starts. And to say that it was going to hit, it was one thing to hit $1 trillion and to do it soon, but the original Axios headline was that the CBO's numbers were revising not only the numbers, but the projection of when we would hit them, that we were going to hit a $1 trillion deficit instead of, as they had originally projected, in the year 2020, like the election year for the president, we were going to hit it in 3 weeks. And that seemed like sort of a big deal and something of a big difference. But I guess they've now revised it. An interesting way of putting it. No, they did not change their estimate of when the U.S. would approach the $1 trillion deficit. We had incorrectly stated that they changed their current estimate from one in April, and they didn't. And so now that story is a non-story. But I did find an explainer about why it wasn't true. So I probably just should have stuck with reading that, because Axios just took away the incorrect claim. But I have here from Stephen Dennis a connection to a tweet from Jonathan Nicholson. Jonathan Nicholson is listed here as the assistant managing editor of BGov. We'll have to even open that up and figure out what is BGov. I don't even know. Bloomberg Government. Okay, so that makes some sense. Now, he says, no, or in his words, nope. The budget deficit is not topping $1 trillion 2 years earlier than the CBO said. It'll likely be closer to CBO's April projection of $804 billion than $1 trillion, and here's why. And then he puts this chart in front of our faces. And if you're like me, you will have no idea offhand what this person is saying. Well, here's why. Well, here's a chart that says what the deficit is and then is projected to be, but it doesn't tell me why. But thankfully, Jonathan Nicholson follows up and tells us why. This is great. This is esoteric at its finest. Great process stuff. Treasury flows are, as he says in technical econometric speak, lumpy. Does that sound like technical speak to you? Some months, here's what it means. Some months are almost always deficit months. What's this about? February and March, for example. That is when people get their tax refunds. Treasury, he says, borrows a lot in those months to pay those, by the way. And he says, shh, little known secret, right? Well kept secret, or maybe worst kept secret in Washington, that somehow, I mean, who knows what's going on when it comes to money flow and that much money. But, we think of things as a piggy bank, like everybody pays their taxes and the money goes into the piggy bank. And then you get your tax refunds. They take the money out of the piggy bank and give it back to you. Oh, why? That's ridiculous. Why do they just not charge us up front? Yeah. Okay. The truth is that those tax refunds are financed with borrowing. Borrow some money and send it back to people, and then, make it up in other ways when other revenue comes in. Some months, he goes on to explain, are almost always surplus months, like, you can guess which one, April. Why? That's where the government sees people ponying up if they owe taxes. But also there are months, throughout the year where quarterly personal or corporate income tax deadlines come due. The months where people are regularly paying their taxes, whether it's all at the end of the year if they still owe money because it's April, or whether they're paying quarterly along the way, there are months where more money is coming in. Another factor is monthly recurring federal payments, some of which are due on the first of the month, the first business day of the month. Anyway, those get shifted, though, if the first falls on a weekend. A Saturday first of the month, for example, pushes those payments to the last Friday of the month before. So sometimes that distorts things. That timing shift, he explains, happens occasionally, and you should look at the 2 months in totality rather than draw conclusions from either one of them. Which brings us to this September. Again, as a quarterly tax payment month, September is almost always a surplus month, and with a healthy economy, it should be again. But this September is notable because the first is on a Saturday. So when we get back, we'll explain one more time what that actually means. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Let us resume reading the very fine Process Esoterica from Jonathan Nicholson from Bloomberg Government, explaining, as we did before the break, that sometimes, what did they say in calling them technical econometric speak, that Treasury flows, cash flows, I guess not really cash, but whatever, funding flow is lumpy. Some months are typically, because they contain tax deadlines, surplus months, and some are just generally speaking deficit months because those are months when payments exit from the Treasury, as with tax refunds, but also recurring federal payments. You know exactly when they're going to occur. They are scheduled to happen on the first business day of the month. But we learned that when when the first of the month falls on a Saturday, it's particularly disruptive because you would otherwise have to wait until Sunday, Monday, 2 days away to get to the first business day. But in order to satisfy the various contractors who are getting paid by the federal government and to sort of live up to our obligations, instead they shift it backwards. They don't pay you 2 days late, they pay you 1 day early. But that puts the payments on the previous month, which also have, in many cases, already seen recurring payments paid once at the actual beginning of that month, which was on a weekday. So if you might find that there are some months where you make recurring federal payments twice in a month. So this September, again, as a quarterly tax payment month, September is almost always a surplus month, and with a healthy economy, it should be again. But this September is notable in that its first is on, yes, a Saturday, and that pushes much of its spending backwards into August, inflating August's regular deficit and September's regular surplus. See what we mean here? August is regularly a deficit month. We pay out twice in August, on the first of the month and on the last day of the month, in order to take care of September's payments. But September will then, A, not see that payment from the first of the month on its books. That got double booked in August. So September kicks off, and the first thing that happens is on the first business day of the month, there is not this enormous exit of funds from the Treasury for recurring monthly payments. And September is a quarterly tax deadline, and so people are going to pay money in. So in the absence of the monthly payments for September, the payments in look much bigger than usual. And with August having two payments out, its deficit, its usual deficit, looks twice as big. So last time this happened with September and August was in 2012. Where August posted a $190.5 billion deficit as a result of those double payments. And September, because it had no such payments, plus the tax deadline, September showed a $75.1 billion surplus. So if you're just looking at the books, you'd be probably pretty baffled by saying, wait a second, we have $190.5 billion in deficit for August, and in September we post a $75 billion surplus. Why does that not even out? Well, eventually it does, and that's why you should look at 2-month combinations rather than 1 month, as he said at the beginning. CBO is saying now, this year, with August, the to-date deficit through August was probably about $895 billion, thanks to August's $211 billion deficit. Now, so the additional, or the posting of $211 billion in deficit in August adds to the cumulative ongoing, what they says the to-date deficit through the end of August of $895 billion. Now, conservatively, he continues, let's guesstimate that means only a $50 billion surplus in September. Now, that would mean the $895 billion to-date surplus minus the deficit minus the $50 billion surplus would put the total deficit through September, I guess, at $845 billion. And because September is the end of the fiscal year, that would mean that we end fiscal year 2018 with $845 billion in total deficit. That's a bit off from April's forecast of $804 billion, but presumably an August forecast, had the CBO done one, would have been a little closer. If they had gotten a chance to rerun their numbers in August, they probably would have hit the $845 billion total deficit figure or thereabouts. Not that an $845 billion deficit versus last year's $665 billion deficit will comfort deficit hawks, if there are any left. But I add that part, if there are any left. But numbers matter, and an argument can be made that there's no need to exaggerate for the effect. You can make your argument just on the facts, or don't do it because of laziness either. And then he ends with the little Forrest Gump gif, and that's all I have to say about that. Well, we learned a little something about that, and that makes it worthwhile. And, you stop in every once in a while for these great process explanations. I don't know when we're ever going to use that again. Probably, well, I don't know, maybe in a couple of years when somebody incorrectly predicts deficit disaster based on monthly reports, and you say, well, now hold on a second. I learned a couple of years ago on the Kagro in the Morning Show that Treasury flows month to month are lumpy, and here's what that means. And people will just say, whatever. They'll come away with Lumpy, and maybe that'll even become your nickname, just like in Scrooged. All right. Well, I thought that was worth a brief detour. Let me check in on a couple of other things that I have for you. Here's another weird story that who knows whether it will blow up into something viral. I have a feeling that it will not. But just as the other day, I had to interrupt things to tell you I had seen the first news of the first time I had ever seen anyone enter the wrong apartment and accidentally, quote unquote, accidentally shoot, thinking it was an intruder, the legitimate occupant of the apartment. That did blow up into a bit of a story, didn't it? We have another one from Well-Regulated Militia, who you should absolutely follow. This feed is a fun and interesting way of keeping up with gun fail. Now that I have mostly fallen down on the job of upkeep of gun fail, it's gotten away from me in the rush of activity mostly surrounding my son's Eagle Scout project, which is ongoing. Various other of our projects. My youngest son recently turned 13, preparing for his own bar mitzvah. That's kind of time consuming. And, then there's the radio show. And I've tried for a while and I've fallen behind, and then I tried to catch up again. And I still like to repeat the stories that I happen to see or that people send to me and tag them with the gun fail. But Well-Regulated Militia has kind of picked up the slack here, finding the most ridiculous gun fails of the day and passing them on in entertaining fashion. And he stumbled upon another one, which comes out of Texas. You'll never believe it. But yes, it happened in Texas, and we'll probably have to fight some auto-playing video and the audio that goes along with it. Let's see if we can kill all of that. All right. Here's the story. Oh, they've switched it up for a burglary at a Chick-fil-A. Okay, terrific. Why? What is this? A pop-up? Get this out of my way. All right, there we are. A man injured by shrapnel at West Behar. I'm assuming they say Behar, B-E-X-A-R, Behar County Gun Range. A man who went to practice shooting at a gun range, that's what you do there, ended up at a hospital. That's sometimes what happens. On the 2700 block of Grossenbacher Road, just out of Loop 1604 in western Behar County, and I'm sure so many of you are familiar with that, officials responded to a call at the Bullet Hole shooting range. That's not the place where you accidentally want to shoot yourself. The Bullet Hole. First responders, otherwise this is a very routine story. First responders called here about 2:30 Tuesday afternoon for an accidental shooting. The owner tells KENS5 the injured person here was shooting, but then some sort of misfire or malfunction occurred. No one knows exactly what happened. They're looking into that now. The person was actually hit by shrapnel, not an actual bullet. I don't think they care. And by the way, yeah, sometimes people have argued with me. Well, he wasn't really shot by a bullet, so it's not necessarily, an accidental shooting. And it's like, well, I have my differences about that. I think, well, what's that shrapnel doing there but for the gun and the shooting? If you're firing a weapon, it produces shrapnel. And I got nothing else to say to you other than minus the gun and the shooting. It's not like you're just walking around and there's just shrapnel floating through the air for no good reason. Naturally occurring shrapnel. Come on. I don't really differentiate. It's a shooting accident one way or another. Anyway, officials say the man was hit by some sort of flying debris, which is another way of saying what a bullet is. I was just walking down the street and there was debris flying around. Of course, it had been launched toward me by someone with a gun, but, in the end, it's just debris. Really. The owner, anyways, of the gun range says the person's injuries were not that critical, that he walked to the gurney. So you can all be happy about how he was accidentally shot. And that when they put him in the ambulance, they called for an air ambulance before they realized that the nature of his injuries weren't that serious. So I don't know what you're supposed to make of that, but we're constantly getting that out of accidental shootings. Oh, he's expected to be okay. He'll be in rehab for the rest of his life. can't use his hand, whatever it is, but he's expected to be a gun. We expect it. Damn it. We love guns and we want people to be okay even when they get accidentally shot. Anyway, this was not a particularly interesting incident other than the fact that it happened at a shooting range called the Bullet Hole, which is a little bit weird. They should change it to the Shrapnel Hole now, of course. But it only became interesting, not just because of the name, but because well-regulated militia noticed that they're back at it again at the Bullet Hole. He said to me, I found your old tweet while we were trying to see if this fine establishment maintains a Twitter account. We wanted to include that in the roundup. He was shot at the Bullet Hole. Why not tag him and shame him on Twitter? Didn't find out whether they had an account or not, but he did find my tweet from October 27th, 2014, noting another shooting at the Bullet Hole. This one considerably more serious. And I guess they don't bother noting in the article here, oh, well, the owner says, the injury wasn't that serious. They called for an air ambulance. And I wonder about that. They called for an air ambulance, but they really didn't need it. He walked to the gurney. I'm wondering whether the owner called 911 and called for I don't know whether you can make the call and say, and we need an air ambulance. I think that's up to them. But it's worth noting that the last time this happened, not that you can find the story anymore with the link that I embedded back in 2014, but at the very same establishment, the Bullet Hole, last time the shooter accidentally shot themselves, A, in the groin, bad news, and B, shot themselves to death. They bled out and died. And maybe that's why an air ambulance was called the second time somebody accidentally got shot while practicing their gun skills at the Bullet Hole. Anyway, just a reminder of all the places you don't want to make the news by accidentally shooting yourself. I imagine the Bullet Hole should be tops on the list. So, warning to anybody out there. I know you're just kind of waking up and getting out of bed there in Behar County, Texas. But if that's the case, let's maybe leave the shooting until later or find someplace else other than the Bullet Hole. I'm willing to bet that, the county has got more shooting ranges than just the Bullet Hole. Okay. Speaking of other stories of extremely local interest, we have this interesting report to pass on from David Joy, who tweets as David Joy _author, because I guess he's an author. And he has an interesting observation from, I guess, his native, or where he lives now, North Carolina. And let's see. There's a number of books listed here, so he seems to be a fairly successful author. And I think you can see why. His imagination runs to the sometimes esoteric, sometimes forgotten aspects of, I guess, what's going on there in North Carolina. Of course, the state under warning for Hurricane Florence, and it appears to be a pretty powerful one. And both North and South Carolina look to be in the direct path and will be hit fairly hard by this storm. And he reminds us of what it will mean for North Carolina, and not just what you see on TV, which will be, I guess, the Weather Channel reporters and network weather reporters headed to, I would guess, the beaches of North Carolina and showing you the devastating effects of the storm coming ashore in, pick your spot, Wilmington, North Carolina, Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, someplace like that. And as opposed to going inland, and not even all that far inland necessarily, to cover stories like this one, David Joy points out, hey, you know what happens when 40 inches of rain hits, as he puts it, he uses the colorful language that we don't like to use on our pretend radio show for the S word. The kids say poop until they're about 8 years old, and then they pick up the other word. You know what happens when 40 inches of rain hits the waste lagoons holding waste for 9 million pigs. Yum. On 2,300 hog farms producing 10 billion pounds of wet waste a year. Do you know? Have you got any idea? I bet you're imagining it now. These lagoons, by the way, are only designed to withstand 25 inches of rain without failing. And so it could be that they get almost twice as much rain as they're designed to withstand. Well, as David says, us North Carolinians are about to find out, which he emphasizes things with a little pig emoji, which is nice. There's another emoji you could have added to that, but there you go. It's going to be fun to find out all over North Carolina what happens to the, where does overflow go when you get twice as much rain as your lagoon is prepared to handle, and it is topped out as it is with 10 billion pounds of pig crap. And it's worse when it's pig crap because I don't know why. Really just about any kind of manure would be awful, but the pig stuff, well, it's from pigs, and we're told that pigs are yucky and messy somehow, and yet everyone loves bacon. So watch out. Wash your bacon, I guess, ladies and gentlemen, if you're getting it from North Carolina. My local barbecue place gets its pigs from South Carolina, or at least so they say. So we're going to be fine. All of the poop will flow into North Carolina. Don't eat I don't want to hurt North Carolina commerce. If I was president of the United States, I'd be in good shape here because I'd be checking myself, recognizing that I don't want to ruin commerce with a careless comment, unlike the doofus we have right now. All right. Let's see. A few other stories, as you might have guessed, floating around besides people who accidentally shoot themselves at the bullet hole in Behar County, Texas, and pig poop overflowing into North Carolina. For instance, let's say, I don't know, Dick Durbin accusing Brett Kavanaugh of misleading senators in his 2006 hearing. You and I would say lying, and we'll see whether we are joined perhaps in the 10 o'clock hour by Joan McCarter, and I will bet that she will feel unrestrained when it comes to saying that the judge lied in his hearings, but he's coming straight out, Dick Durbin is, and releasing some additional paperwork to prove it. He's accusing Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, of misleading the Senate Judiciary Committee during a hearing more than a decade ago, releasing emails on yesterday, saying releasing emails that he says proves his claim. Let's see what it is. Durbin released 2 pages of emails. Kept it down to 2. That's good. From 2002. Stamped committee confidential. Oh my God. Meaning they had not been cleared for public release. That detailed Kavanaugh's conversation with 2 other White House officials on the nomination of William Jim Haynes to fill a judicial vacancy. It is clear now that not only did Judge Kavanaugh mislead me when it came to his involvement in the Bush administration's detention and interrogation policies, but also regarding his role in the controversial Haynes nomination, Durbin said on Tuesday. And I have a feeling we'll get to his misleading the Senate on interrogation and detention when we speak with Joan next. The emails released by Durbin show Kavanaugh, then an employee in the George W. Bush White House, discussing a potential Haynes nomination with 2 of his colleagues in a brief email thread. After the 2 colleagues exchanged emails discussing Haynes, Kavanaugh replies saying that they need to resolve the package of judicial nominations, potentially including Haynes, quickly. What is the basis for saying he would be an across-the-board judicial conservative? I have no reason to think that way or another outside of defense/military area, one way or another. And I know others have questions about that, Kavanaugh added. I guess he wasn't conservative enough, which is a pretty amazing thing to think about. Haynes, as general counsel to the Pentagon, was involved in the Bush administration detention policy after the September 11th terrorist attacks. When one of Kavanaugh's White House counsel colleagues asked who had questions about Haynes, Kavanaugh replied, "Call me." Durbin on Tuesday seized on the emails as evidence that Kavanaugh misled senators when he testified during his 2006 confirmation hearing for the Circuit Court of Appeals in D.C. The Democratic lawmaker, that's Durbin, had asked Kavanaugh at the time about his involvement in Haynes' nomination, including if he knew about Haynes' work on Bush's detention and interrogation policies. Kavanaugh told the senators that while he knew Haynes, it was not one of the nominations that I handled. Durbin on Tuesday called the emails the latest example of a theme around Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court, confirmation hearings for which took place last week. He says one thing under oath, and then the documents tell a different story. It is no wonder the White House and Senate Republicans are rushing through this nomination and hiding much of Judge Kavanaugh's record. The questions about this nominee's credibility are growing every day, Durbin said. Spokesman for the Judiciary Committee Chair, Chuck Grassley, didn't comment immediately or respond to a request for comment about the status of the emails released by Durbin. Raj Shah, spokesman for the White House, quickly hit back at Durbin's, quote, latest lie in attempting to smear, unquote, Kavanaugh. Notice that the White House not at all shy about saying that Dick Durbin lied. Dick Durbin tiptoeing and tip dancing, perhaps, around the fact, for whatever reason, Dems love to do it, that Kavanaugh lied in his own right. When you look at the full testimony, I guess Raj Shah says Senator Durbin's cherry picking of Judge Kavanaugh's words is more deceptive. In later testimony, Judge Kavanaugh explicitly answered yes, he was involved in discussions involving the nominations of Haynes. He was just a nomination, but he says multiples. Well, that's what Shah said in a series of tweets responding to the emails that Durbin released. Shah's tweet includes a screenshot over questions between Chuck Schumer and Kavanaugh from the 2006 hearing. Schumer, following up on Durbin's question, asks Kavanaugh if he was involved in discussions about Haynes, including if he voiced opinions about him. I don't remember the timing of that, but if it was when I was in the counsel's office, it would have come through the Judicial Selection Committee when I was a part of it, Kavanaugh responded. It's a bit non-committal, but okay. When Schumer asked if he could give a yes or no answer about if he was involved with discussions on Haynes, Kavanaugh added, Senator, I believe those were when I was still in the counsel's office, so the answer would be yes. Although he does as much as he can to distance himself from it, apparently. Shah, following up in a separate tweet, questioned what Durbin's point is by releasing the emails on Tuesday. He has none. He doesn't really question. He just declares that there is none. Dems are dishonestly conflating being the White House counsel lead responsible for handling the nomination with any discussion of the nomination whatsoever. It's a complete and total smear with no basis. Shah added, complete and total. It's total. Durbin's office said in a release that the emails are still marked committee confidential, and they had not been cleared for release by Republicans or Bill Burke, a lawyer for Bush, who's been sorting through documents from Kavanaugh's work as White House counsel. The emails aren't the first time Democrats have accused Kavanaugh of misleading senators during his 2006 hearing. Both Dianne Feinstein and Pat Leahy, who, like Durbin, are members of the Judiciary Committee, seized last week on Kavanaugh's emails regarding Bill Pryor's judicial nomination. Kavanaugh previously said he was not involved in that nomination, but could not rule out last week that he might have questioned Pryor, who is controversial because of his stance against Roe v. Wade. Asked by Leahy if he interviewed Pryor, Kavanaugh said he didn't believe so, but added it is possible. Asked later by Grassley, who argued that Democrats were trying to misrepresent the email, Kavanaugh added that he was not the primary person on Pryor. So I guess that's the thing on which it all hinges. Whether he was involved or just not involved a whole hell of a lot. We'll see. All right. A couple other stories to round up and share. We are drawing closer to our mark for the 1 hour break. And let's see. Things slowing down here today. The laptop's really working hard. Let's see. A couple of other very interesting stories to round up, and I'm trying to think of the best way to deal with all of that. Let's see. Let's throw this one in here. BuzzFeed News has an interesting story, which hopefully we can make short work of. But it has to do with judiciary issues, since we're sort of kind of on the topic. this a decision made elsewhere, not by Brett Kavanaugh, but Zoe, I don't know whether she says Zoe or Zoe Tillman over at BuzzFeed News reporting on this one. Trump didn't incite a riot, it's found, when he said, "Get him out of here," at a rally, and then protesters were hurt. This according to a court ruling. The First Amendment protects Trump because he did not specifically advocate imminent lawless action, according to a panel of federal appeals judges treating this one. I feel like there's some auto-playing video rolling somewhere, and I just can't find it. We'll see if I think I can shut it up, though. President Donald Trump, the ruling now states, can't be sued by protesters who accused him of inciting violence at a 2016 campaign rally, a federal appeals court has ruled on Tuesday. In response to protests during a March 21st, 2016 rally at the Kentucky International Convention Center in Louisville, Trump repeatedly said, "Get him out of here." The protesters who sued said those comments prompted Trump supporters in the audience to assault them. One protester was punched in the stomach. A lower court judge had previously denied Trump's request to have the case tossed out, and Tuesday, a 3-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit sided with the president, surprise, finding that Trump's comments at the rally were vague enough to be shielded by the First Amendment. They also found that his conduct didn't fall under Kentucky's anti-rioting law. It's nice of them to have one of those available for us. Speech is powerful, Judge David McCaig wrote in the majority opinion, quoting from another case. Yet, as a nation, we have chosen to protect unrefined, disagreeable, and even hurtful speech to ensure that we do not stifle public debate. I don't know what kind of public debate was supposedly going on at the rally, but there you have it. If you don't say, punch that guy in the stomach, I guess you can't be sued for just saying, get him out of here, like the old days. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and as I'm sorting through alternative stories to pick up and realizing just how slowly the wheels are turning in the laptop today, I'm getting a little bit concerned for its health. But hey, it's the older, not the oldest one we have running, but one of the older units. Anyway, let's see. There's plenty of stories we can round up, and let me head back to the one about the Sixth Circuit court decision. I think I found one of the places where audio is still streaming. We'll have to get rid of that one here. Okay, flipping back to the BuzzFeed story. Speech is powerful, but as a nation, the opinion continued, we have chosen to protect unrefined, disagreeable, and even hurtful speech to ensure that we do not stifle public debate. Now, Dan Cannon, a lawyer for the protesters, told BuzzFeed News in an email that although they respected the court's opinion, they plan to seek further review. That may mean, of course, Supreme Court and maybe Brett Kavanaugh. How do you think he'll rule on something like that? The plaintiffs could ask the 3-judge panel to reconsider its decision first before getting to the Supreme Court, I guess, or they could ask for a full sitting of the Sixth Circuit to take up the case. And that's much more likely than getting to the Supreme Court with this, but you never know. Mr. Trump, throughout his campaign, intentionally used crowd violence to suppress dissident speech, the kind of core speech that the First Amendment traditionally protects. The court's opinion today gives him a free pass for that conduct, even though he had publicly been asking for violence to occur at these rallies for months, and even though his co-defendants have said they would not have attacked our clients if Trump had not directed them to do so, Cannon said. Allowing a candidate for public office to use the First Amendment as a shield under these circumstances is unprecedented and dangerous. It is kind of interesting that, after all, to quote another case and to say, we have chosen to protect unrefined, disagreeable, and even hurtful speech to ensure that we do not stifle public debate. Well, when protesters show up and express unrefined, disagreeable, or even hurtful speech in opposition to the candidate, well, their speech and debate appears to have been pretty well stifled. Though there are, I think, other more egregious examples of Trump's more clearly calling for violence, and I don't know whether those incidents have resulted in court cases elsewhere. Trump's lead attorney in the case, Michael Carvin, did not immediately return a request for comment. Trump's campaign rallies in 2016 were, as you know, often raucous and sometimes turned violent, with the president's supporters clashing with his detractors. Videos of the March 2016 rally in Louisville show Trump's supporters pushing protesters in the middle of the crowd as Trump says, "Get him out and get him out of here," from the stage. McCaig wrote in Tuesday's opinion that the idea that Trump's conduct at the Louisville rally met the standard under Kentucky law for inciting a riot was undermined by the fact that at one point he said, "Don't hurt him." And I guess that would undermine things, although there were other instances in which he said, "I'll pay your legal bills." Right? No, it didn't happen there, though, I guess. The judge wrote that Trump's remarks fell under the First Amendment because he did not specifically advocate imminent lawless action. It follows that if Trump's speech is protected, then the fact that audience members reacted by using force does not transform Trump's protected speech into unprotected speech. The reaction of listeners does not alter the otherwise protected nature of speech, McCaig wrote. The decision was unanimous, but one member of the panel, Judge Helene White, thought it was a closer call. In a one-page concurring opinion, White wrote that the majority opinion elides salient details of Trump's speech. She didn't specify what details, and gave too much weight to the "don't hurt him" comment. White wrote that she agreed Trump's conduct didn't meet the standard for inciting a riot, but she said the court should have stopped there and not delved into the First Amendment question. An interesting perspective as well. Just shifting in the chair here a little bit. I guess, can we oil this thing? Producers, get in here and give me some oil for these wheels. Okay. Annoying sounds in the background today. Again, as the laptop works hard to keep itself cool, the fan is becoming kind of an annoying distraction. Hope it's not bothering you. Anyway, good point here by Judge Helene White. And, the idea of, maybe it does give too much weight to "don't hurt them." You don't have to hurt somebody to assault them. I mean, to get them out of here, how are you going to get them out of here? Are you going to politely invite them to leave, or are you going to lay hands on them? An assault is an assault. It doesn't have to hurt, but this one did. Even though he said, "Don't hurt him." Well, we know about the other speeches that he gave. In the old days, they'd be taking you out of here on a stretcher, right? So, I don't know. Maybe those fans didn't hear those previous words at previous rallies. They can't be held accountable for that. All right. A couple other stories here, worth sharing, I think, in no particular order. But New York Magazine reminding us of something that happened in the Papadopoulos case that we didn't pay a great deal of attention to. And this basically asks, and they hope explains, why that might have happened. Christian Farias, I'm hoping I got that pronunciation correctly, reporting under the headline, "Why the Mueller Probe's Papadopoulos Bombshell Fizzled." And I guess it did, because I might not have noticed the bombshell. Let's take a look and see if we can catch up on these details. Before she and George Papadopoulos married, Simona Mangiante Papadopoulos seemed to have high hopes for her fiancé's cooperation with special counsel Robert Mueller. They have had a weird relationship with the special counsel's office, haven't they? But there's something I gotta tell you, I'm willing to accept that maybe she just has an Italian accent that I don't recognize it for whatever reason. I'm usually pretty good at that stuff, but apparently not here. But there's something weird about that lady, and I'm not sure what it is, and it's not all her either. George Papadopoulos is a bizarro figure all by himself. Anyway, let's read into this story here. In December, she told ABC News that her soon-to-be spouse would be remembered as the first domino to fall in the Russia investigation, the first person associated with the Trump campaign to plead guilty to a crime arising out of Mueller's investigation of the Kremlin's interference with the 2016 election. Expectations, including my own, were just as high for Papadopoulos. His guilty plea in a federal court for lying to the FBI, made public on the same day Paul Manafort and Rick Gates were indicted for far more serious crimes, kicked off with great fanfare the public phase of Mueller's sprawling inquiry, following months of speculation about what exactly the special counsel might have up his sleeve. Maybe the whole Papadopoulos story from top to bottom is the bombshell that fizzled. The public had good reason to be hopeful. What prosecutors filed in court that day was a bombshell in the truest sense. With stunning detail, Papadopoulos' statement of the offense made plain that Trump's one-time foreign policy advisor had lied to investigators about the extent, timing, and nature of his contacts with an enigmatic professor that he, quote, understood to have substantial connections to Russian government officials, unquote, and who had volunteered that the Russians had dirt in the form of thousands of emails belonging to Hillary Clinton. At least on paper, Papadopoulos' knowledge appeared to hold the key to a number of mysteries in the Russia investigation, including whether high-ranking Trump officials unlawfully conspired with Moscow to tip the election. But Mueller and his team knew better, and from the very beginning, they left us breadcrumbs signaling that Papadopoulos wasn't all he was cracked up to be. In his same guilty plea, which he agreed to in secret several weeks before it became public in late October, something was missing. An explicit provision setting out a cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors, or a promise that prosecutors would in return push for sentencing leniency if Papadopoulos were to provide substantial assistance to the government's investigation. A common feature of cooperation agreements that was a part of the plea negotiations for other targets of the Mueller investigation, such as Gates and Michael Flynn, who to this day are actively cooperating. Papadopoulos didn't get any of those assurances, and if anything, there's little in the public record indicating that Papadopoulos was of much help to Mueller at all. In a revealing sentencing memorandum filed in federal court last month, lawyers for the special counsel's office offered a wealth of insights as to the timeline of the Papadopoulos case and all the steps he took to make it harder for prosecutors to do their job. Most notably, Mueller's team accuses the so-called coffee boy of hindering their capture of Joseph Mifsud, that elusive professor, who had told Papadopoulos about the damaging Clinton emails the Russians had. The defendant's lies undermined investigators' ability to challenge the professor or potentially detain or arrest him while he was still in the United States, the prosecutors conceded, but all but acknowledging that Mifsud got away and hasn't been found since. Mueller's office theorized that Papadopoulos' rampant lies were motivated by self-interest and an attempt to secure a job in the Trump administration. 1 week into the new administration, and just hours after his first interview with the FBI, for example, investigators discovered that he had sent his bio and a description of his campaign work to the Energy Department. He was a self-described energy consultant before he joined Trump's foreign policy team. Ultimately, after repeated attempts at getting him to be truthful, prosecutors concluded that Papadopoulos undermined his own case and wasn't of much help. The defendant did not provide substantial assistance, they wrote in their sentencing recommendation, and much of the information provided by the defendant came only after the government confronted him with his own emails, text messages, internet search history, and other information it had obtained via search warrants and subpoenas well after the defendant's FBI interview as the government continued its investigation. It certainly didn't help that Mangiante Papadopoulos, his wife, that's a real mouthful there, man, started railing against the Mueller investigation in media interviews and on Twitter as he awaited sentencing, going as far as to suggest that the special counsel wasn't giving her husband enough credit for cooperating, that he may need new lawyers, and that Trump should consider pardoning him. Just last month, she told the Daily Caller, a conservative news site, that, I guess you could call it that, it's a conservative site anyway, that her husband should consider tearing up his plea deal. Mueller's office appears to have had it with the publicity tour. In court papers, lawyers for the special counsel refuted point by point several of Mangiante Papadopoulos' claims in the court of public opinion, and on one occasion they abruptly canceled a prearranged meeting with Papadopoulos himself once prosecutors learned, quote, that the defendant had participated in a media interview with the national publication concerning his case, unquote. A little noticed protective order agreed to by Papadopoulos' lawyer ahead of sentencing and signed by the judge is a strong indicator that lawyers on both sides of the case didn't want anyone directly or tangentially associated with it to leak details about the investigation or what exactly Papadopoulos relayed to investigators. Which brings us to Papadopoulos' day of reckoning last Friday. U.S. District Judge Randy Moss sentenced him to 14 days in federal detention, 1 year of supervised release, 200 hours of community service, and a $9,500 fine. That may sound like a walk in the park, but it won't be. Federal probation is no fun, and the felony conviction will follow Papadopoulos the rest of his life. In arguing for a light sentence, his lawyer, Thomas Breen, told the judge that Trump did more to put obstacles in Mueller's path than his client did. The President of the United States hindered this investigation more than George Papadopoulos ever could, he said, in open court, according to Politico. At no point did Breen suggest that Mueller's office behaved improperly or engaged in misconduct in the course of the prosecution, a common complaint of Trump allies. So concludes the anticlimactic saga of the first domino of the Mueller probe, which continues apace later this month with the second trial, this time in Washington, of Paul Manafort, as well as the ongoing grand jury investigation of Roger Stone, which has seen strange twists and turns. In an interview with George Stephanopoulos on Sunday, one of several he has given in recent days, Papadopoulos spoke to Stephanopoulos, in which metropolis? I think probably Washington, D.C., said that following the completion of his sentence, he intends to write a book and head to Hollywood, presumably to turn his life into a movie. And what a boring movie it would be, since it's been such a fizzled bombshell. Those who paid close attention to his words may have noticed something funny. He praised Trump and distanced himself from his lawyers' opinions about him, including the notion that he's an obstructor-in-chief. I wish him all the luck in the world, and I hope he continues to do good things for this country, Papadopoulos said, as if deep down he really wishes he had never been responsible for lighting the spark of a counterintelligence investigation that has haunted the Trump presidency and maybe even the course of American history. So, what did we learn about why the bombshell fizzled? Next to nothing. But we did learn that the bombshell did fizzle, and maybe, I don't know. I mean, I guess I was sort of puzzled. I did want to catch up on these things. I sort of figured like there would be more fireworks with respect to Papadopoulos and his sentencing coming at last. And we heard such drama leading up to things and, he should tear up his plea agreement. I figured we would hear something more. And I guess he's just kind of quietly going to jail, and that's a good thing, but I think we all hoped for something perhaps bigger to come from his agreement to cooperate, but then I guess he never did, in fact, cooperate very much. So, very odd, very strange, very disappointing, but not much in the way of explanation there so far, but maybe a misleading headline. The fact is that the bombshell fizzled, and we don't still really know exactly why that would have happened. Okay, let's see. A few other directions we might be able to turn. Don't know whether Joan will be available today or not. I have not been able to check on the front page what's happening there or what's due to appear soon, according to the queue of stories there. So it may be that it's a very busy day there on the Hill and still dealing with perhaps the Kavanaugh vote in the committee, perhaps slated for today. I did try to find out when that was going to happen and couldn't find information on it quickly, but it's due to be happening sometime soon. The floor vote, I don't think yet scheduled, but that would be the next step on things. So it may be that Joan is tied up, but if not, we'd welcome her here for a couple of minutes, no problem. And usually that sometimes happens, I guess. bumping right up against our third break, which comes up in about 10 minutes. So maybe that's how it'll happen. Let's jump over here to, let's round up a couple of the more egregious Trump lies of the last couple of days. Daniel Dale, one of the experts in cataloging those lies. And this is an interesting one here. He says, one of I guess this is it. His favorite Trump lie from the last week of August. It's funny that you have to categorize these things this way. Well, from the last week of August, because there's just so many each day. This is an interesting one. At an official event, I don't know which event, the lake, he said, beside his Charlotte golf course, he claimed was the largest man-made lake in the world by far. That's an interesting thing to claim. Like, I don't really know who would care about that, but it is also not true. The largest man-made lake in the United States, let alone the world, it turns out is 25 times larger than this stupid lake next to his Charlotte golf course. I don't know why you would bother making that claim. Just another one of those things that shows you that, like we repeat the anecdote all the time, Donald Trump would lie to you about what time it is just for the practice. I mean, he's just standing there at what is presumably a large man-made lake, but what would be the point? There's some context here. Here's the comment. Let's see. Charlotte has been a great place for us, and I actually have investments in Charlotte. Of course, who cares? They'll say, oh, there's a conflict of interest. The fake news, they'll say, there's a conflict. You know where my club is, right? Trump National. And it's a very big success on Lake Norman. Beautiful. Largest man-made lake in the world by far, right? And oh, by the way, so he built the golf course that happens to be near this lake, Lake Norman. It's not Lake Trump. He didn't build it. It wasn't part of his golf course. It's just nearby. Largest man-made lake in the world by far, right? The electric company. What? They made it maybe? Is it? Had to be more than man-made. That was made with a lot of money for a long time. So I don't know. Now he's just babbling gobbledygook. Like, I assume that it's a lake that got created. What did they dam a river for electricity? Is that how the electric company got in there? And then had to be more than man-made. What? That was made with a lot of money for a long time. No one knows what he's even talking about. Anyway, doesn't matter because, in fact, they point out that Lake Norman is not even close to the largest man-made lake in the world. Not even the largest man-made lake in the United States, which is apparently Lake Mead in Nevada and holds 25 times more water than the world-famous, apparently, Lake Norman. More than man-made, made with a lot of money. It's not man-made, it's money-made. What a nut. Our president is an idiot. Anyway, moving on from that, Joan McCarter is here to join us. Joan, our president is an idiot. I'm not sure if
yes,
you're aware
and
of this.
I'm calling to save you from having to do more impersonations of him
it's
for
insane.
at least the next half hour.
Although, honestly, I brought that one up because there was also one that came up yesterday. I guess it's in the new book, the Woodward book, but just showing more of the kind of liar that Trump actually is. Not only that it's so venal and weird that he would choose to lie about this stupid lake. Like, who cares? Even if it was the largest man-made lake in the world. It's not his lake. But,
did you see the passage that was going around Twitter yesterday about his voting record?
Yes, that's the one. That's exactly it. That's an amazing lie because of who's involved. But as I recall, it's a story from the Woodward book, and he's sitting with Steve Bannon, bad news, and David Bossie, who's also bad news. And I guess this is while in the early stages of his campaign, and they're trying to, I don't know why they asked. Do you know any more context about why they asked him about his voting record?
No, I don't know the context.
All right. So they just, they want to know whatever. They're talking about his, I guess now he's a candidate for president, and it might come up that you don't care about politics normally. You don't even vote in primary elections. And he challenge them. They're clearly talking about primary elections.
And his bona fides as an actual Republican.
Yeah, there we are. That must be it. Right. So, for instance, you're going to run in a Republican primary for president. People are going to say, you don't know what you're talking about. You know what you're doing. You got no experience. In fact, you don't even have any experience being a Republican, let alone being an elected official. That's clear. No one thinks he has experience that way. But you're going to be challenged in a Republican primary. You don't even vote in Republican primaries. You've been a Republican for 15 minutes. You're even on record at some point as saying, if I ever ran for president, I would run as a Republican because Republicans are idiots and they'll believe anything.
Right.
So, they're trying to patch this up. Like, how are we going to deal with that? So he's sitting with Bossy and Bannon. And the quote here, I found it now, where they ask him about his voting record. And he says, what do you mean my voting record? About how often you vote. What are you talking about? Okay, I'm talking about how often you vote. Well, Bossy said, this is a Republican primary. Okay, so that's what he's getting at. And Trump says, I vote every time. I've voted every time since I was 18, 20 years old. Can't make up his mind, 18 or 20. When I was coming up, 20, I'm sure he was trying to remember whether the voting age was 18 or 20 when he was growing up. I can't figure out which one it is. Anyway, but Bossy, he's sitting there with his voting record from New York State in front of him. And he says, well, that's actually not correct. There's a public record of your vote. And Trump says, they don't know how I vote. No, not how you vote, how often you vote. And at this point, Bannon realized that Trump did not know the most rudimentary business of politics. Welcome to the club. I voted every time, Trump insisted. Now, again, Bossy, who's his guy, he's hiring him, is sitting there telling me, I have the records of when you voted, right here in front of me, and I'm telling you didn't. No, I did. He insists. Actually, you've never voted in a primary, except once in your entire life. And this is where you learn something about Trump. So he's got the records. He tells them that. And Trump says, that's a effing lie. That's a total lie. Every time I get to vote, I voted. You only voted in one primary. It was in like 1988 or something, in the Republican primary. Trump realizes he's right and says, you're right. Trump said, pivoting 180 degrees, not missing a beat. That was for Rudy. Giuliani ran for mayor in a primary in 1989. Is that in there? He's asking. What's astonishing to me about this one, not only the immediate pivot to you're right without so much as oh, hey, I'm sorry, I just called you an effing liar to your face. But what really got to me was the vehemence with which he insists other people are lying when he's caught not knowing what the hell he's talking about. And you'll hear that line quite a lot. You won't use the F word normally in his rallies, but every time, that's a lie. That's a total lie. So I just want to point that out, and not that anybody needs that pointed out specially for them, but when he goes to that line, that's a total lie. You can say, guess what? There's another thing you once called exactly the same thing, a total lie. And it turned out that the record was right in front of your face by someone you hired to tell you what your record was, and you still said it was a total lie, and it took all of 1 second to get you to realize, nope, I'm completely wrong here. So every time I hear that from now on, that's a total lie. We always knew that he was lying about it being a lie, but at least now there's something on the record. Even with his own people, he does the same exact thing. So that was the one that really jumped out at me. I'm glad. Thank you for remembering which one it was.
That and his basic lack of understanding about how any of this works. He thought people could see how he voted.
Yeah. And
not
because
just that he voted, but how he voted.
And then because, I guess he doubted that, but because I guess he just figured that's what it was. And because he knew that they shouldn't be able to see that, then there's no way to know how often I voted. But again, just a simple semantic thing like, dude, it's when you go and you give them your name, they check you off whether or not you voted. You know, that whole thing that's supposed to prevent all the voter fraud you're so angry about all the time. Yeah, that record. They do keep those records. You wanted them to keep those records, right? To prevent fraud. Well, it's there. And guess what? You never go. And which was obvious to anyone who ever saw that video of him from years ago trying to show up to vote for the presidential election in 2008 and not knowing which precinct he was supposed to go to and going to 3 of them. I don't know if you remember that one.
I remember that, yes.
All right. Well, we're going to regroup for 2 minutes and be right back, and Joan will help carry us through the rest of the show after this. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter with us, waiting patiently through the break. Thank you for joining us. And yeah, I guess it turns out that you're still busy on the Kavanaugh front, and the evidence for that is all over the front page, of course. You were telling me during the break, I did want to straighten out, when is the vote expected then in committee?
They are going to bring him up tomorrow in committee. Whether they vote tomorrow is unclear, but they will bring him up. Democrats have every reason to try to stall this as much as possible while they continue to release more information, like Durbin did that you talked about earlier today.
Right.
So McConnell said something about trying to get him to the floor week after next, looking toward a vote by the 30th.
Okay.
So they're still doing whatever they can to shove this through as fast as they can.
Yeah.
Before more bad information comes out.
I assume, the longer they wait, the worse it is, and
because more stuff's going to come out. Yeah. It's bound to.
Yeah. And I guess even if stuff doesn't come out, just the having it hang out there for a long time just gives people chances to get cold feet and change their minds or think.
It gives us a lot more time to work on Collins and Murkowski.
Yeah, who are.
And I think Murkowski's probably leaning no, but there's of course no reason for her to do so unless Collins and every Democrat goes along with it.
I guess so. Unless it's just, okay.
Well, there are a lot of reasons for her in Alaska.
Yeah.
One of the reasons she was reelected on a write-in ballot was because of the very substantial Native American population, Native Alaskan population, voted for her. In a big block. So she owes her reelection largely to those folks, and they are really opposed to Kavanaugh on a variety of fronts. He's got a bad record on the environment, which is critical to their subsistence, and he's bad on Native issues in general. So she's got really good reason to vote against him.
Yeah, I think I did see that point made during the hearings. It didn't get a great deal of attention, but I guess Senator Hirono was making a point of, and there's this sort of traditional unspoken partnership between Hawaii and Alaska, the last two states admitted and that have large indigenous populations and therefore similar concerns. And I guess about those issues anyway, I guess Kavanaugh, as you might expect, hostile to the idea very often of contracting set-asides for native populations, which is enormously important. It brings in an awful lot of money into Alaska. And,
Yes.
I mean, that's, I guess, why they supported her in her reelection bid. I mean, she's pretty good at stuffing pockets full of federal money and bringing it home. And, and that's what senators, generally speaking, are expected to do. And so, if all of that is endangered by Kavanaugh's carrying water for, the conservative and very often, bigoted, politics that goes along with it, and looking to stuff money in their own pockets instead of setting some small portion aside for native populations, well, it's a double threat to your livelihood, I would guess.
Yeah.
Not only environment, but any of the money that might come in by way of assistance in contracting is in danger because we're post-racial now.
Beyond that, I think Murkowski is more committed, more principled when it comes to abortion rights than Collins. Collins isn't principled when it comes to anything, really.
Yes.
Except Collins' Senate seat.
It's pretty amazing. I don't know why. I don't know what she does with it.
How she played Planned Parenthood and NARAL all of these years is beyond me, but she did. No longer.
That's true. They're not blind
Planned
to it.
Parenthood's coming out with a 6-figure ad buy against her this week.
Yes,
she can whine more about how she's being picked on.
Yeah, she's so deeply troubled by all this. And yeah, it was a big story in the last couple of days that the reporting was anyway that the constituents visiting the offices were finding that people were answering phone calls about Kavanaugh, but taking no notes and not passing anything on to the senator. And then Collins was telling people, my constituents don't seem bothered by him. They're not calling me about it. And maybe just that nobody's telling you about it, or you're just lying. There's that too.
I think she's lying.
That could be it. It's a very weird, I don't know. I really don't know why. Who knows why she's been able to hang around so long. And now, she's got this bizarro interpretation of, what it means when constituents say, well, if you vote for Kavanaugh's confirmation, I will help fund a challenger to you in the next election. This she views as bribery now, which is amazing.
Which, if anything, it's extortion.
True. One, you have the wrong crime. And two, yeah.
No, it's politics.
Yeah.
Senator Collins.
I mean, yes, people are making the very good point that, if a millionaire or a billionaire were to come around and say the same thing and throw $1 million into the race because you agreed to support his position, that would be fine. Or when other big ticket donors, get together and throw a fundraiser for you, that's all well and good.
Perfectly normal.
Right.
Yeah, it is rather fun to see Republicans screaming bloody murder about campaign financing, about big money in politics.
Yeah, all of a sudden it's a huge problem. And, as we learned from Mitch McConnell, if you have a problem, talk to Mitch about it. Money is speech, and people, up in Maine are deciding to speak and tell you what they're going to say to you in the next election if you vote for Kavanaugh. And this is apparently beyond the pale for her. Again, deeply concerned.
Yeah. And,
all right.
I think Collins' goose is cooked either way for 2020.
You would think.
I think she's burned so many bridges with the left that they're not going to be there to back her up. But the same is true of the right. I mean, no matter what she does on this vote, she's in trouble. She's already in trouble for killing Obamacare repeal with the Lepage Republicans.
Yes.
I like to say Lepage because
it's that much funnier. Yes.
It is funnier. And that's what she seems to be most worried about, is a challenge from her right next time around. LePage is gonna primary her either way.
I guess so. I mean, what else is
crazy
there to do?
Republicans probably win. So she might as well try to do her best to start fighting Trump and try to get independents and Democrats with her if she wants to save her seat in 2020.
Yeah.
But she appears to think that her salvage is on the right.
I don't know.
Salvation, I should say.
She doesn't remember, or I don't know, maybe she just was puzzled by the reception she got after the healthcare vote. But like, how often do they, cheer for you in a parade there in Maine? I thought,
show up at the airport to welcome you and thank you. That doesn't happen.
No.
Anywhere.
And it was, I mean, I hope she's not imagining, what do I care? Maybe I hope she is imagining having it happen the same way and having people show up and cheer for her vote for Kavanaugh, but they're not gonna. They're not gonna be there for that. That doesn't matter that much in their lives. And there probably aren't even that many people really in Maine who would be interested in it at all, much less excited about it. But everybody uses healthcare. That's
everybody uses healthcare. That's the thing. And that's one thing that they need to be looking at very, very carefully right now.
Yes.
What's Kavanaugh going to do on healthcare? Because it seems very likely that the judge in Texas who heard the challenge to Obamacare last week against all odds, against all rationality, is going to vote for Texas, is going to decide for Texas. Timothy Jost, a professor of law at, emeritus professor at Washington Lee University School of Law and also a healthcare expert, listened to the hearing yesterday, last week.
All right. Okay.
I haven't caffeinated enough this day. He was at the hearing last week and wrote about it yesterday at Balkanization.
Okay.
And it's pretty terrifying
what
he reports. He says there is no indication that O'Connor read the amicus briefs filed by virtually every stakeholder in the American healthcare system. I'm quoting now: doctors, hospitals, insurers, patient groups, consumer organizations, small businesses, older Americans, as well as numerous health economists and public health experts, demonstrating the bad consequences of his decision. He also showed absolutely no interest in the announced intentions of the senators who had voted for the amendment to the ACA that had provoked the lawsuit. He, apparently a George W. Bush appointee, is looking for every possible reason he can vote with Texas and strike down the protections for our pre-existing conditions.
Hooray.
And if he does so, there is absolutely every chance that this reaches the Supreme Court.
Yeah, okay.
So there you go.
Yikes. Okay. I wanted to grab this article. This is from yesterday, you say? Balkanization?
Yeah.
All right, I think I've got the right one. Very good. I'll provide that to everybody so you can read through it one more time and get that quote right and panic appropriately.
And send it to your senators who might still be questioning this vote.
I guess.
And that's the other side of it. At this point, there is no reason for Chuck Schumer to not be whipping Democrats.
Yes.
And we got more of that today. Polling from YouGov conducted before the hearings in just red states where there are Democrats up for re-election. In Florida, Indiana, Missouri, North Dakota, and West Virginia. And I just wrote this up before I joined you. What they found is that the huge majority of undecided voters don't particularly care.
Yeah.
Upwards of 80% of voters in, say, West Virginia and North Dakota don't particularly care which way their senator votes on Kavanaugh. So it's not going to sway any undecideds at this point. What it is going to do if they vote for Kavanaugh is turn off the Democratic base. In Missouri, 35% of Democrats said they'd be less likely to vote for McCaskill. In Indiana, 35% said they'd be less likely to vote for Donnelly. 31% in Florida, less likely to vote for Nelson. West Virginia, 30% less likely for Manchin. North Dakota, 26% less likely for Heitkamp if they vote for Kavanaugh.
Okay.
Voting for him isn't going to bring any Republicans to them.
No, I can't imagine ever.
Ever. All of the issues upon which Republicans or Democrats care is how they're going to vote.
Yes.
And Republicans care about the things that Kavanaugh's going to do to destroy all of our rights. They're never going to vote for a Democrat anyway.
No, they don't want any doubt from their senator. If they were to vote for Kavanaugh, they might, if they cared, say, "Phew, we dodged a bullet on that one," but I don't want there to be any doubt next time. And so that's why I'm voting for a Republican, no matter who it is.
Right. No matter who.
I've never seen
anybody switch. And Democrats are going to say, well, damn, and maybe hold their nose and vote, but they sure as hell aren't going to, say, volunteer, put up a yard sign, make phone calls, and maybe not even vote.
And that will be something that they bring up to her, too. If they ever run into her, you know what? I'm not volunteering next time, and I'll tell you why. And it's Kavanaugh. And you knew that.
Because this is a lifetime appointment.
Yeah. I can't imagine a Republican.
Court nominations really only totally motivate the most hardcore base voters. Yeah. The ones who are really paying attention. And the ones who are really paying attention here on the Democratic side are livid.
Yeah.
That this guy is even nominated.
Well,
there's absolutely no reason at all that Schumer is not whipping his Democrats. That he hasn't got them unified in a block, and that they're not turning that pressure on to Collins and Murkowski.
Well, I'm sure there is a reason we don't know it, and it's probably not a good one, and that's why we don't know it. I don't want people to know what it is, because it's not a very good reason, and they won't like it. I can't imagine, beyond just, wow, that seems like kind of a pain in the neck, and fatalism and thinking you're going to lose the vote. But I mean,
the other part of it for me is how hard the Democratic senators on judiciary worked last week. They were all of them on fire. Even Richard Blumenthal was good. Even Chris Coons had his moment.
They
worked really hard, and they put themselves on the line by releasing committee confidential documents. They risked a lot to fight this nomination, and I really hate to see that go to naught.
That's got to be discouraging. I wonder what's going on in the heads of the senators who did that work. They would, of course, be privy to the discussions. Dick Durbin. Yeah, right. That's true. I mean, they must have been privy to the discussion of whether or not there was going to be this whipping effort. And, surely somebody at some point must have thought, well, if, let's say, Cory Booker releases these documents, as he made such a big deal of it last week, and says, bring it on if you think you're going to expel me. It must have occurred to him maybe after the fact, maybe as he was saying it, he must have known, well, obviously it takes a 2/3 vote to expel a senator. And, imagine sitting there thinking, well, before I say this, Chuck Schumer would whip on my expulsion vote. Yes, he would, right? He would make sure no Democrat votes to expel me, I think, right? Maybe I ought, should I not do this? Would he say, well, some red state senators are going to have to vote with Republicans to maybe expel Booker? Really?
No.
Yeah. Well, they're never going to do that, but maybe it doesn't require any whipping, but imagine going into that fight or continuing that fight and thinking, I don't know if my leadership will be there for me. I find that astonishing because generally in the main, Chuck Schumer, the senator, you think, well, there's no way he's going to vote to expel these people over this. No, he's enough of a partisan fighter when he needs to be that I don't expect that. But And I often explain that, the decisions he comes to as leader are, we forget that they're driven by what his constituents, in this case, the Democratic caucus members, tell him they want. And if they don't want to be held to account, and the leader nonetheless is constantly holding them to account, he loses their confidence as leader and they pick a new one at some point. So, in some sense, he has to be responsive to it. And it may just be that red state senators are pressuring for the dumb reasons previously mentioned to be able to vote yes on Kavanaugh, even though no Republican will ever vote for them. And as a result.
No.
But,
and for Christ's sake, he lied to them.
Yes. I don't understand, what's the point of being a senator if the vaunted oversight that you're supposed to be able to do, the check you're supposed to be able to provide against Donald Trump, whatever, is constantly thrown overboard in the scramble to pick up an independent in, whatever county, who, that one crazy guy who said, I usually vote Republican, but because you let Kavanaugh on the court, and I really like Kavanaugh, no one does, he's the least popular nominee. I don't know how much polling they usually do on nominees. It's a pretty rare thing, I think.
They do polling on nominees.
I guess they do.
CNN, that's another thing I wrote up, a quick little hit. CNN did polling.
I heard that
right
they had
after
on
the
Kavanaugh.
hearings. And they've been doing it since 1987
All
with
right.
Bork. At least that's what they listed. And
so
he's the most unpopular in 3 decades.
Amazing.
More unpopular than Bork.
And next time somebody says, refers to borking, I'll say, what, polling people on whether or not they think he belongs in the Supreme Court? Is that what you mean by borking? I didn't realize that was when they started.
Borking, by the way. Bork got hearings.
Yep.
Bork got a floor vote.
Yeah.
He lost.
Right.
He was not filibustered.
No.
He got an up and down vote. He lost it.
That's bad.
So, yeah.
It's like elections have consequences.
What Republicans would have you think borking is.
Yes. They think he got unfairly blocked or he was filibustered, had to withdraw, etc. you have a floor vote and you lose.
They don't think that. They're trying to make the rest of the world think that. They know very well what happened.
Yes, good point. Well, I like that you straightened that out. There's a very fine point that it's too easy to say they believe that, and doesn't tell you the whole story. What if they believed it? They're dumb. If they don't believe it but say it anyway, they're evil. And I think that's much more the case.
Yes,
good
particularly
point.
Mitch McConnell.
Yes, certainly he knows very well exactly what happened.
Mitch McConnell is single-handedly destroying the world.
Well, congratulations. It's quite
that
an
might
accomplishment.
be a bit hyperbolic, but really, how much of what really horrible stuff has happened in the last, I don't know, a really long time is down just to Mitch McConnell.
Yes. Well, as Republican leader, you're going to be called on to do some horrible things, and he doesn't balk at those things, including
he
embracing
figures out
Trump.
how he can make them worse.
Yes. And that's
Merrick
a unique
Garland.
talent. Yeah. Oh, well, yes. He's got a rare talent for it. I must say he's an expert at making things that you didn't think could get any worse somehow worse.
Yeah. And Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court is he lied to the Senate multiple times.
Yes. And participated
he's such a hyper partisan. Not even, he rose up in Republican circles. This guy, as you were pointing out last week with the Vince Foster suicide stuff, he has been neck deep in some of the very worst things Republicans have done, mostly in Florida.
Yeah.
For decades.
Yes, and he and his associates, he's got a weird circle. Like you said, he came up in Republican circles, but in a particular Republican circle, really just the slimiest hyper-partisans you ever could imagine. And as we were saying last week, I was calling him like the Forrest Gump of of horrible election dirty tricks for Republicans. He just is at the heart of everything they've done, not just elections, but his policy and nominations, etc.
Well, and Elian Gonzalez, remember that?
Yes.
He was one of the agitators against the Clinton administration with that. Mm-hmm. Terry Schiavo.
Yes.
He woke Bush up in the middle of the night to sign the so-called emergency legislation passed by the Senate by Trent Lott.
Yeah.
Or was it Bill Frist?
I guess that would have been Frist at the time. He was diagnosing her anyway.
Yes. To prevent Michael Schiavo from making a decision about his brain-dead wife.
Yes. Has he been interviewed on this nomination?
The Schiavo stuff, that didn't come up.
No. I was wondering if someone should have talked to Michael Schiavo about your view on the Kavanaugh nomination. Yeah. This is the guy who actually woke the president and changed your life. And
he was on the Bush v. Gore team I'm sure he was one of the Brooks Brothers rioters.
Oh, that could be. I don't know. I have to look at the picture. But he was certainly there. I mean, that was his purpose.
He's a nightmare.
In all respects.
And that's not even getting into how he got $200,000 in debt buying baseball tickets.
Which is really unbelievable. I don't know. And apparently, was there no questions about that? I did see a
There
piece
weren't questions about that, but yesterday, White House followed up with a detailed letter requiring him to respond about that. Who were these people who you bought tickets for? What was your arrangement for getting repaid? How did you manage to clear all of that $200,000 in debt on 3 credit cards and in a personal loan in a year's time? And do you have a gambling issue? Basically was what he was getting at.
I guess so, because that's the rumor. But yeah, the baseball
coming from one of the hearings, one of the emails that was released that surrounding that reunion that he had with friends on the boat with the
the weird email.
His reference to losing big in a dice game.
Oh,
that's what White House homed in on.
I see.
In asking gambling questions. So
well, you don't want that on your Supreme Court, or really anywhere, but man, it
would be nice to know how he cleared $200,000 in debt in one swell swoop.
Yes, people should. That's the purpose of these financial disclosures. And I mean, in addition to his lying about previous nominations and whether he had any hand in it, it seems like his financial disclosure form might be full of holes as well. And it's just, at what point are you guys going to insist that people must answer or must fill out these forms truthfully before, hearings going, okay, you might not be able to control
give them a lifetime appointment on the Supreme Court.
Right. That should at the very least, answer the question for, oh my goodness, I'm a red state Democrat, et cetera. And, you'd think you would be able to get away at some level with going back to your state and saying, hey, I think he seems to be a fine fellow, but, you just can't lie on your forms.
There are too many questions, and this is a lifetime appointment.
Yeah, you can't lie to us in the hearings, and I just can't abide by that. I'm sorry.
At the very least, they could demand a delay until after the election, until the National Archives actually has time to get all of the documents to them.
I mean,
that
they can
Republicans
demand.
agree to allow them to see. I mean, there's every reason to, at the very least, call for a delay here.
Yeah. And if you can't do it, I mean, you may not get it. I mean, you won't get it. They'll just steamroll right past it. But why you can't say...
Pretend like you're fighting.
Yeah. And I voted against him because we don't know anything about him. He lies about his answers to our questions. Forget the fact that he lied in the last set of questions, and just you come to the Congress and ask for a lifetime appointment. Fill out your paperwork properly. That's all I'm asking. And they won't do it. I have to say we either have to wait until he does, or I'm voting no. And it doesn't have anything to do with the issues necessarily. It's that the guy has to like we keep saying, play an immigration card in there. We always want that. No, it's not that we don't want immigrants, it's that we want you to do it legally. Well, no, it's not that I don't want Kavanaugh, it's I want you to do it legally. But they're lying about that too. So. Oh well.
They're lying about that, yes.
Yes. All right. Well, we are out of time. We're handing things over to Justice Putnam. Thank you for coming by and visiting with us. It's getting tough to do these shows day after day on your own, and people love to hear from you, Joan. So thanks so much for coming by.
It was good to be here. I'll work for more coherency next week.
Okay, and we'll discuss probably next week that will be like near a fortnight to government shutdown, I think.
Yes.
Kids love Fortnite.
That will be next week's topic.
All right. Excellent. We'll see you then.
All right. Thanks, Kagro.
Thank you. All right. Time to turn things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We'll see what we can cram in about it next.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, excellent. Let's see. Will the computer give me any chance at all about reading Justice Putnam's fantastic and well thought out summary of what's going to come up next on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? The answer, unfortunately, is no. And so it's time to take the computer in for a faster processor so that we can do it better next time.